What if the so-called California dream wasn't as flawless as the glossy magazine spreads and staged Netflix shots made it seem? What if, just days before one of Prince Harry's most important returns to the United Kingdom, the curtain slipped, revealing raw tension, raised voices, and the unmistakable sound of a marriage under strain? That is exactly what witnesses in Montecito claim they saw. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, standing outside their sprawling mansion, locked in a heated exchange that left neighbors stunned and paparazzi lenses clicking. The fairy tale facade cracked, and the timing couldn't have been more dramatic. Think about that for a second. A couple who built their entire narrative on stepping away from the suffocating scrutiny of royal life, fighting, in public, in front of the very mansion that symbolizes their escape. Isn't there something almost poetic in the irony? The world they rejected has followed them across the ocean, and now, it seems, their private battles are spilling into the very public eye they once tried so desperately to escape. And all this just as Harry prepares to fly back to London for the Wellchild Awards, the event that, year after year, reties him to his mother's legacy and his deepest vulnerabilities. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now let's set the stage. Imagine Montecito on a warm California afternoon. The sun painting the sky in shades of gold, the ocean breeze rolling through the palm trees. Peace. Perfection. At least on the surface. Behind the gates of that grand mansion, though, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Witnesses described doors slamming, voices rising, and what sounded like a conversation that had long simmered boiling over at last. And then, there they were. Harry and Meghan, in plain view, gesturing, shouting, visibly angry. The prince's face red with frustration. Meghan, her hands cutting through the air in sharp, emphatic motions. Can you see it? That image alone tells you something seismic was happening. But why now? Why there? Why this argument? Just days before Harry's journey back to the UK. That's where things get truly intriguing. Because this wasn't just another marital spat. No, the timing points to something much deeper. A storm gathering between duty and desire, between heritage and Hollywood, between a man pulled back to his past and a woman desperate to carve out a different future. The Wellchild Awards have always been a cornerstone of Harry's public life, an emotional anchor tied directly to his late mother, Princess Diana. Meghan knows this. She's walked beside him on those red carpets before. And yet, this year, she isn't attending. Was that the heart of the argument? Was Harry pleading for unity while Meghan dug in her heels, refusing to play the role of dutiful partner in a setting she no longer believes in? Or was it something even more personal? Let's pause and ask the question directly. Have you ever seen a couple argue not about what's happening in the moment, but about everything that's been left unsaid for years? That's the feeling here. This wasn't just about a plane ticket to London. This was about years of resentment, clashing priorities, and the ghosts of decisions that can't be undone. The decision to leave the royal family. The choice to spill secrets in books, interviews, documentaries. The gamble on Hollywood deals that promised billions but delivered less than expected. And now, Harry's insistence on returning to the UK, even for a few days, may have reopened wounds Meghan thought were already healed. The emotional stakes couldn't be higher. Imagine Harry, caught between loyalty to the legacy of his mother and loyalty to the woman he loves. Imagine Meghan, convinced that stepping back into the royal orbit, even for one night, risks undoing everything they've fought to build. Can you feel the tension? That push and pull between past and present, between personal healing and public obligation? That's not just drama, it's tragedy in motion. And for them, it unfolded not behind closed doors, but in full view of neighbors and passers-by. And yet, here's the contradiction that makes this story so irresistible. Harry and Meghan have long claimed they crave privacy. That was the central argument when they left the UK. But privacy, it seems, doesn't exist for them. Not really. Because every move, every gesture, every fight becomes fodder for speculation. The same paparazzi they despise captured them in that vulnerable moment. The same media they blame for so much pain is now feasting on their turmoil. And in a way, isn't that the greatest irony of all? The very walls they built to keep the world out are now the same ones echoing with the sound of their conflict. But let's not forget the larger stage. This isn't just about one argument in Montecito. This is about a couple whose relationship has always been both intensely private and relentlessly public. From the moment Meghan entered Harry's world, their love story was weaponized, celebrated by some, vilified by others. Every milestone, the wedding, the babies, the departure from royal duties, was drenched in global commentary. And now, every crack in their bond becomes another headline. Another "told you so" for critics, another painful reminder for supporters who once believed in the fairy tale. So here's the burning question for you. Are we witnessing the unraveling of Harry and Meghan's story, or just another chapter in a saga that thrives on highs and lows, peaks and valleys, victories and defeats? Because if this fight tells us anything, it's that the tension between them isn't fading, it's escalating. And when fights escalate, they don't stay contained. They explode. And yet, we can't rush to judgment. Was this fight a sign of an impending fracture? Or was it, paradoxically, proof that beneath the carefully curated smiles, they are just as flawed, just as human, just as messy as any of us? That's the paradox that keeps us glued to their story. They are royal, yet ordinary. Famous, yet vulnerable. Powerful, yet powerless against the weight of their own decisions. And maybe that's why we can't look away. But here's the cliffhanger. What happened in Montecito wasn't just about Harry and Meghan. It was about what comes next. Because Harry's trip to the UK isn't just another public appearance. It's a moment loaded with symbolism, tension, and history. Will he stand alone on that stage at the Child Awards, haunted by the echoes of the fight back home? Will Meghan's absence speak louder than any speech he delivers? And more importantly, will this argument, captured in whispers and glimpses outside their mansion, be the beginning of a much larger story? Because what looked like a private argument may actually expose the deepest fracture yet in their marriage, and the timing couldn't be worse. And what came next would change everything, in ways no one saw coming. What if Montecito, the very place Harry and Meghan chose as their sanctuary, wasn't a safe haven at all, but a gilded cage that revealed more about their struggles than it concealed? What if the sprawling mansion, with its manicured lawns, high hedges, and tight security, wasn't just a symbol of freedom but a pressure cooker where unspoken resentments simmered until they boiled over? That's the contradiction we're stepping into now, because Chapter 1 isn't just about a house. It's about what the house represents. A dream sold to the world, and the nightmare hidden behind its gates. Picture it, a $14.7 million Montecito estate, complete with rose gardens, tennis courts, and 9 bedrooms fit for royalty who no longer wanted to be royal. From the outside, it looks like perfection, exactly the kind of setting you'd expect for California's most famous expatriates. Birds singing, sunlight spilling through Spanish-style archways, the sound of the Pacific crashing in the distance. A place where peace should reign. But peace, as neighbors and insiders have quietly suggested, is in short supply. This Montecito mirage has always been part of Harry and Meghan's branding. It's the answer to the question, where do you go after walking away from a 1,000-year-old monarchy? The narrative was simple. You go somewhere quiet. You find a beautiful mansion. You live happily ever after with your children and freedom. It was a Hollywood script, one Meghan surely understood how to pitch. But the reality is far messier. Have you noticed how often Montecito itself creeps into their headlines? Whether it's paparazzi shots, security complaints, or whispered reports of lavish parties, the very place that was supposed to offer privacy has become another stage. And this is where things get interesting. Because that mirage isn't just about optics. It's about pressure. Think about it. If you've spent millions on a home that screams luxury, don't you feel compelled to prove that the life inside matches the life outside? Neighbors see the perfect lawns, but do they hear the arguments behind the glass? And if they do, what does that mean for the story Harry and Meghan have fought to control so carefully? Now, let's take a step back. Why Montecito? Why here of all places? Meghan, ever the strategist, saw in Montecito what many Hollywood elites already knew. It's a bubble. Oprah lives here. Ellen DeGeneres, Katy Perry, and Orlando Bloom. It's a community built for the rich and famous to escape public scrutiny. But irony follows them like a shadow. Because what happens when you escape into a bubble filled with people just as famous as you? Privacy doesn't magically appear. Instead, it creates competition. Whose house is bigger? whose life is shinier, whose image is more untouchable. Do you think Meghan didn't feel that pressure when her neighbors' careers thrived while her own projects stumbled? And then there's Harry. He didn't choose Montecito, Meghan did. For Harry, this isn't home. This isn't Windsor or Kensington. This isn't the rolling green countryside of the UK where he grew up. This is palm trees and paparazzi drones. Neighbors who might smile in passing but sell whispers to tabloids at night. Can you imagine how isolating that must feel for a man who grew up in a system where, despite its flaws, loyalty was everything? And maybe, just maybe, Montecito feels less like a sanctuary for Harry and more like a stage he never auditioned to stand on. Now let's talk about the fight. Eyewitnesses claim the argument spilled onto the grounds of this very mansion. Think about that image for a moment. A grand home with high hedges and walls, designed to keep prying eyes out. And yet, the fight was visible, audible, undeniable. Isn't that the purest symbol of the Montecito mirage? You can build the walls as high as you want, but you can't contain the truth. Here's where it gets deeper. The mansion isn't just real estate, it's a metaphor. It embodies the couple's attempt to redefine themselves. Inside those walls are the children, Archie and Lilibet, whose lives they've sworn to protect. Inside are the deals, the contracts, the scripts written late into the night about how to turn royal scandal into Hollywood content. Inside is the promise Meghan made to Harry. That life here would be freer, brighter, more authentic than the rigid formality of palace life. But if that promise begins to crack, what's left? Isn't it just another castle? Except this one, instead of ancient stone, is built of stucco and illusions? And here's a contradiction that must be asked. How private can Montecito really be? For all the high fences and gated drives, this community is teeming with insiders, assistants, contractors, paparazzi with telephoto lenses. Someone is always watching. Someone is always listening. That's how details of their supposed fight leaked out. And you know what that means? Montecito didn't save them from the press. It delivered them to a new one, more insidious, more invasive, and perhaps even less forgiving. So, let's ask the burning question. Was this fight inevitable? When you build your sanctuary on a foundation of appearances, can it ever truly withstand the weight of reality? Meghan wanted Montecito to be their fresh start. But Harry may see it as exile. She sees glamour and opportunity. He sees distance from his family and his roots. She sees neighbors like Oprah as allies. He sees strangers who will never understand the scars of Windsor. Can two people look at the same place and see two entirely different worlds? And that, perhaps, is the heart of the Montecito mirage. Because it's not about the walls. It's about what those walls contain. The smiles, the hand-holding photo ops, the carefully curated lifestyle shots, they all suggest unity. But the shouting, the slamming doors, the confrontation that spilled into public view, they tell another story entirely. Now, here's where it gets even more dramatic. This argument didn't just take place in Montecito, it was about Montecito. About the choices that led them there, the sacrifices Harry made to support Meghan's vision of freedom, and the growing realization that freedom doesn't come cheap. Reports suggest financial pressures, tensions about deals not delivering, and the mounting cost of their luxury lifestyle all played a role. Isn't it fascinating how a mansion that was supposed to symbolize independence has instead become a symbol of dependence on Hollywood, on media deals, on a constant churn of content to maintain relevance? And then, of course, the timing. Why did this blow up just before Harry's return to the UK for the Wellchild Awards? Because Montecito and London aren't just two different places. They're two different lives, two different versions of Harry. One is the California Harry, reinvented, rebranded, but perhaps unmoored. The other is the UK Harry, still the son of Diana, still tied to charities and causes that cut to the bone of who he is. And when those two versions collide, where do they fight? At home, in Montecito, in the supposed sanctuary that instead became a battlefield. And here's the cliffhanger. Montecito was meant to shield them. Instead, it exposed them. Because if their perfect home can't contain the cracks in their marriage, then what can? And if the fight was visible to neighbors, what else might spill out next time? Because as we'll soon see, that wasn't just a fight in Montecito, it was a warning. A glimpse of deeper fractures, of battles still to come. And what those neighbors heard that day was only the beginning. What if the world's most private couple suddenly found themselves exposed? Not by choice, not by a carefully staged photo shoot, but by raw, unfiltered reality playing out in plain sight. What if the very people who live next door, the gardeners trimming hedges, the paparazzi hiding in the hills, became unwilling witnesses to a royal showdown on American soil? That's exactly what happened in Montecito. And Chapter 2 is where we pull the curtain back on those who saw it all. Let's start with the shock factor. Neighbors in Montecito, many of them used to celebrity antics, aren't easily fazed. After all, they live alongside billionaires, movie stars, and moguls who argue, party, and parade their lives without hesitation. But even in this jaded community, whispers began circulating fast. A neighbor spotted Harry and Meghan mid-argument on the grounds of their mansion, voices raised, gestures sharp, tension visible even from a distance. For people accustomed to carefully curated royal images, this wasn't just surprising. It was explosive. Now imagine the paparazzi. Montecito may be quiet, but it isn't invisible. Photographers know where to linger, where the views are, where the chance encounters happen. They've been chasing Meghan and Harry since day one, and any slip, any moment of humanity, is gold. And on that particular day, they didn't get smiles, waves, or photo ops. They got conflict. The body language was unmistakable. Harry, face red, pacing, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Meghan, sharp in tone, pointing, her stance wide and unyielding. The kind of posture you only use when you're defending yourself in a fight you've been through before. Can you see it? The argument wasn't just loud. It was visible, tangible, undeniable. And then the insiders began talking. Staff who overheard fragments of words through open doors. Contractors who caught snippets while working on the grounds. Nothing stays secret in a mansion crawling with people hired to keep it running. One source described the atmosphere as volatile. Another claimed it felt like a buildup waiting to explode. Whether exaggerated or not, these whispers added fuel to the fire. Because in Montecito, gossip doesn't stay confined to one person. It spreads fast, especially when it involves the couple who once claimed to want nothing more than privacy. Here's the contradiction that makes this so captivating. Harry and Meghan have spent years insisting they left the UK to escape prying eyes. And yet, here they are, in Montecito, their argument becoming neighborhood conversation. The very thing they fled, the invasion of privacy, has followed them across the Atlantic. Isn't it ironic that this sanctuary they purchased has turned into a stage where even the walls can't contain their voices? Let's take a closer look at the psychology of this moment. Public fights don't happen out of nowhere. Couples argue behind closed doors all the time. But when a fight spills into public view, it usually means the tension has reached boiling point. For Harry and Meghan, this wasn't a matter of a minor disagreement. It was the culmination of weeks, maybe months, of unresolved issues. And the witnesses, whether neighbors peeking from balconies or paparazzi with telephoto lenses, saw the very thing the couple most wanted to keep hidden: authenticity. Not the Netflix-polished version, not the staged smiles. The raw, unfiltered truth. Let's ask the audience directly. Do you believe in coincidences? Do you believe that this fight just happened to take place outdoors, just days before Harry's return to the UK? Or was it a sign of something bigger, an eruption too powerful to be contained indoors, at a moment when the couple's differences were most exposed? Because the timing feels too precise, too sharp, too dramatic to be accidental. And then came the whispers to the press. Small, seemingly innocuous leaks at first. Neighbors heard raised voices. Harry looked distressed. Meghan seemed angry. Just fragments, but fragments that painted a vivid picture. And once those pieces were out, the narrative began to write itself. Headlines screamed about trouble in paradise. Analysts dissected body language. Commentators tied the fight directly to Harry's looming trip to the UK. The story spread like wildfire. And remember, the couple can't control wildfire. They can only watch it burn. Now, let's explore the ripple effect. Montecito is a close-knit yet competitive enclave. Celebrities here thrive on image, but they also trade in information. Everyone knows everyone else's business. So when Harry and Meghan's fight became the talk of the neighborhood, it wasn't just about scandal. It was about power. Neighbors who once viewed them as glamorous new arrivals now whispered about instability. Do you see how dangerous that is for Meghan, who's trying to rebuild her Hollywood image? The very community she hoped would shield her is now quietly undermining her reputation. And let's not forget the paparazzi. Those long-lens shots of Harry storming off, Meghan gesturing with exasperation, whether captured clearly or hinted at in eyewitness retellings, become powerful weapons. Pictures can say more than words. Even blurred, grainy shots hinting at discord feed into the global appetite for drama. And for Harry, who's spoken at length about how the media destroyed his mother's peace, imagine the sting of realizing the cycle is repeating. The very thing he tried to protect his family from has found them again. But perhaps the most telling witness isn't a neighbor or a photographer. It's Harry himself. Observers noted his body language, slumped shoulders, visible frustration, the kind of exhaustion you can't fake. Meghan, on the other hand, was described as fiery, uncompromising, standing her ground. Two people, two very different approaches to conflict, exposed in real time. That kind of contrast doesn't just hint at a fight. It hints at a deeper incompatibility, one that may be getting harder to ignore. And so we reach the cliffhanger. Because if neighbors, staff, and paparazzi witnessed this moment, what else might they see in the future? Was this argument a one-off explosion, or is it the beginning of a pattern too loud, too visible, too undeniable to contain? And most importantly, what exactly were Harry and Meghan fighting about that day? Because eyewitnesses can tell us what they saw, but not why. And it's in the why that the real story lives. Because the truth is, the fight wasn't just about Montecito. It wasn't just about appearances. It was about something deeper, something personal, painful, and explosive. And what they were arguing about may just be the key to understanding whether their marriage can survive the weight of everything they've built. What if Meghan Markle's biggest fight wasn't with the royal family, but with Hollywood itself? What if the same industry she once dreamed of conquering, the red carpets, the studios, the powerful producers, was now the very source of her deepest frustrations? That's the tension at the heart of Chapter 3. Because when Meghan raised her voice in Montecito, many believe it wasn't just about Harry's trip to the UK. It was about the slow, painful realization that her Hollywood comeback wasn't unfolding the way she expected. And that frustration, that gnawing sense of failure, was spilling into her marriage. Let's start with a shocking question. How does a woman go from being one of the most Googled names in the world to struggling for meaningful roles and deals in the very industry that once celebrated her? Meghan walked into Hollywood with the biggest platform imaginable, a duchess turned rebel, a woman who literally shook the monarchy to its core. Yet, as months turned into years, the projects didn't quite land. The Spotify deal collapsed. The Netflix partnership, though lucrative at first, faltered after one big documentary series. Hollywood, famously fickle, began whispering that Meghan wasn't as bankable as she seemed. Imagine how devastating that must feel for someone who had envisioned herself as a new Diana meets Oprah hybrid. Think about this for a moment. Meghan left the UK saying she wanted independence, her own voice, her own platform. But what happens when the platform you build starts to crumble? The irony is brutal. In leaving behind a palace, she expected Hollywood to hand her a crown of its own. Instead, she found herself competing with younger, hungrier, more established stars. And in that world, titles don't matter. Duchesses don't get special treatment. You're only as good as your last project. So let's ask directly. Could this be the real reason behind the Montecito fight? Could Meghan's anger at Harry be less about his UK obligations and more about her own stalled career? When dreams falter, blame has to land somewhere. And who's closer than a husband who, in her eyes, may not be doing enough to support her Hollywood ambitions? Now, let's rewind a little. Remember Meghan's early days in Hollywood? Suits gave her recognition, but she was never an A-lister. She worked hard, hustled, clawed her way up in an industry notorious for rejecting women of color, especially as they age. Then came Harry, the prince who turned her into global royalty overnight. Meghan probably believed she had finally found her golden ticket, not just to fame, but to influence. And in some ways, she did. For a while, they were unstoppable. Oprah interviews, glossy magazine covers, endless buzz. But Hollywood doesn't care about the long-term fairy tale. Hollywood asks, what's next? And if the answer is silence, or worse, failure, then the industry moves on without you. Picture Meghan in that Montecito mansion, scrolling through headlines about her canceled Spotify deal, reading snarky articles suggesting she's difficult to work with, hearing whispers that producers are wary of her. Can you imagine the rage, the humiliation? Add to that Harry's looming trip to the UK, a place where Meghan feels both rejected and despised, and you have the perfect storm. And here's where the contradictions really sting. Meghan once said she left the royal family to escape being silenced. Yet in Hollywood, she's discovering a cruel twist. She can speak, but not everyone is listening anymore. The industry that once lined up to hear her story has grown bored. The victim-turned-hero narrative doesn't sell like it used to. And without fresh content, without new successes, her brand begins to fade. Isn't that the ultimate betrayal for someone who built her life on narrative control? Now let's bring Harry into the picture. For him, Hollywood was never the dream. He went along with Meghan's vision, signed the contracts, posed for the cameras, gave the interviews. But deep down, Harry isn't a producer. He isn't a Hollywood player. He's a man tied to causes, to charities, to a legacy bigger than Hollywood can contain. So when Meghan lashes out about her career struggles, how does Harry respond? Likely with confusion, maybe even defensiveness. He can't solve the Hollywood problem because it isn't his world. And for Meghan, that might feel like abandonment. Ask yourself this. Have you ever blamed the person closest to you for frustrations they had no control over? That's the dynamic playing out here. Meghan's career hits a wall, and Harry becomes the easiest target. Every time he talks about returning to the UK, it's a reminder that he has something she doesn't, an unshakable tie to a legacy that still wants him, even if it rejects her. That kind of imbalance is poison in a marriage. And then there's Meghan's personality. Say what you will about her, she is not someone who accepts failure quietly. Friends have described her as ambitious, calculating, driven. Those traits carried her into the royal family and gave her the courage to step away. But ambition cuts both ways. When it meets resistance, it can turn into bitterness. And according to insiders, that bitterness has been bubbling. Meghan expected Hollywood to roll out the red carpet. Instead, it offered a few contracts, some polite applause, and then silence. The silence, more than anything, is unbearable. And so she raises her voice at Harry. She points fingers. She vents. And Montecito, that so-called sanctuary, becomes the stage for her fury. Witnesses didn't just see an argument. They saw Meghan's career frustrations manifesting in real time. And Harry, caught in the crossfire, looked like a man who had no idea how to calm the storm. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Meghan's Hollywood stress isn't just about her own ambitions. It's about legacy. She knows she's being measured against Diana, against Kate, against Oprah. She knows every failure is another weapon for critics. And with every lost deal, every PR misstep, that pressure grows heavier. So when Harry prepares to return to the UK for the Well Child Awards, an event where he will shine alone, does Meghan see it as abandonment or as betrayal? And that brings us to the cliffhanger. Because this wasn't just a fight about Hollywood. It was about Meghan realizing she can't control the narrative anymore. Not in Hollywood, not in the UK, not even in her own marriage. And when someone who thrives on control begins to lose it, the fallout is always explosive. Because what Meghan said next, according to whispers, wasn't just anger. It was something so sharp, so cutting, that it left Harry visibly shaken. And the Montecito fight was only the beginning. What if the very trip meant to honor Harry's late mother became the trigger for one of the most explosive arguments of his marriage? What if the weight of a single event, the Well Child Awards in London, was enough to reopen wounds that Harry thought had healed and drive a wedge between him and Meghan? That's the crux of Chapter 4. Because this wasn't just another royal obligation. For Harry, it was personal, deeply personal. And for Meghan, it was a reminder of everything she wanted to leave behind. Let's start with a stark truth. Harry has always been two men. On one hand, he is the California husband and father, living in Montecito, chasing freedom, enjoying the sunshine with Meghan and the children. On the other hand, he is still the son of Diana, the prince tied forever to the legacy of his mother's compassion, charity, and unfinished story. And nowhere is that duality more visible than at the Well Child Awards. The Well Child Awards have defined Harry's public life for years. These aren't just ceremonies where he shakes hands, poses for photos, and delivers rehearsed lines. They cut to the bone of who he is. Sitting in rooms with seriously ill children, listening to parents talk about heartbreak and resilience. It's the closest thing Harry has to continuing Diana's legacy. When he speaks at those awards, his voice cracks, his eyes glisten, his guard drops. It's the rawest version of him the public ever sees. Can you imagine how much weight he places on being there, on doing it right, on showing the world, and himself, that he is still his mother's son? Now, imagine Meghan's perspective. To her, the Well Child Awards aren't about Diana. They're about the UK. They're about walking back into a world that has rejected her, mocked her, painted her as the villain. Every headline about her attendance would be brutal. Every photo would be dissected. Every move compared to Kate's. Meghan knows this. And so she draws a line. She tells Harry she won't go. She won't step foot into that environment again. For her, the risk outweighs the reward. But for Harry, that's not just a refusal. That's a wound. And here's the contradiction. Meghan married a man whose identity is split down the middle. He can't be just Harry. He'll never be just Harry. He's Diana's son. He's the prince who grew up in the public eye. He's the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin while the world watched. No Montecito mansion, no Hollywood reinvention, no Netflix deal can erase that. The Well Child Awards are proof. They're the reminder that the UK still has a claim on him, whether Meghan likes it or not. So ask yourself, how would you feel if the person you love most refused to stand beside you at the moment you felt closest to your mother's memory? Wouldn't you feel abandoned? Betrayed? That's the emotional knife twisting in Harry's heart. He wants Meghan there, not for the cameras, not for the palace, but for him, for support. And she says no. And then comes the deeper tension. Meghan has her Hollywood struggles, her PR battles, her image to manage. But Harry's struggles don't disappear just because he lives in California now. Every time he returns to the UK, he steps back into a role Meghan can't understand. A role she doesn't want him to play. And yet, he can't let it go. Because without it, who is he? What is he? This is where the argument outside the Montecito mansion turns volcanic. Harry insists he needs to go. Meghan insists he shouldn't. He frames it as honoring his mother's memory. She frames it as reopening wounds that will never close. He argues it's about duty. She argues it's about survival. And the neighbors hear the echoes of a marriage caught in a tug-of-war, not just between husband and wife, but between past and present, between heritage and reinvention. And here's where the irony cuts deep. Meghan often accuses Harry of clinging to the very institution they fled. But Harry, in moments like these, sees himself not as clinging, but as remembering, holding on to the one piece of his royal identity that matters, Diana. Isn't it tragic that the very cause that gives him strength might also be driving a wedge between him and Meghan? Now, let's ask the audience directly. Can a marriage survive when one partner is anchored in the past and the other is desperate to escape it? That's the dilemma playing out here. Harry can't abandon Diana's legacy. Meghan can't stomach the idea of re-entering the royal sphere, even tangentially. So where does that leave them? Stalemate. And in a marriage, stalemate feels like betrayal. Picture Harry that day in Montecito. His voice breaking, his hands in his hair, telling Meghan that he has to go, that it's not just about optics, it's about his mother. Picture Meghan, arms crossed, sharp tone, telling him he's walking into a trap, that the UK press will tear him apart, that she won't be there to shield him. Two people, two truths, clashing in the California sun. And yet, here's the cliffhanger. This wasn't just about whether Meghan would attend the Well Child Awards. It wasn't even just about Harry's trip. It was about something much deeper, Harry's identity itself. Because if Meghan can't accept the parts of Harry that are still tied to Diana, still tied to the UK, then what happens next? Because what Meghan said in that moment didn't just question Harry's decision. It questioned who he was. And for Harry, that may have been the most devastating blow of all. What if every choice Harry makes, every step he takes, every argument he has with Meghan is haunted by the one figure he can never escape? His mother. What if Diana's ghost isn't just a memory, but the silent third presence in their marriage, shaping Harry's emotions and fueling the very fights that now spill into the California sunshine? Chapter 5 dives into the heart of this truth. Harry's devotion to Diana is both his greatest strength and his deepest wound. And when Meghan collides with that devotion, sparks inevitably fly. Let's begin with the obvious. Diana isn't just Harry's mother. She is his anchor, his symbol, his reason for so many of the choices he makes. The Well Child Awards aren't just another event for him. They are a living extension of her compassion, her legacy, her desire to give the voiceless dignity. For Harry, walking into those rooms is like walking into her embrace. Every child's story, every parent's pain, brings him back to the boy he was in 1997, walking behind her coffin, the world watching him suffer in silence. He has never escaped that day. He never will. Now, put yourself in Meghan's shoes. She married a man, but she also married a memory larger than life. Diana looms over everything. Harry's sense of duty, his moral compass, even the way the public perceives Meghan herself. The comparisons are relentless. Is Meghan the new Diana? Would Diana approve? How would Diana have handled this? At first, Meghan leaned into that narrative. She wore echoes of Diana's outfits. She drew parallels in interviews. She encouraged the idea that she was Diana's spiritual successor. But over time, those comparisons turned toxic, because instead of lifting her, they weighed her down. And in Harry's heart, no one, not even Meghan, can truly replace Diana. Here's where the tension sharpens. Harry often speaks of making Mum proud. It drives him. It guides him. But Meghan, insiders say, sometimes bristles at this. Because in her eyes, constantly invoking Diana means living in the past, not the future. Meghan's ambition is forward-facing. Hollywood, influence, deals, reinvention. Harry's heart is backward-facing, honoring Diana, preserving her memory, connecting his children to the grandmother they'll never meet. Can you see how those two visions clash? And let's ask the audience directly. Have you ever loved someone who couldn't let go of a past pain? Who carried a ghost into your relationship, whether it was an ex, a parent, or a trauma you couldn't compete with? That's Meghan's reality. Every time Harry brings up Diana, it's a reminder that Meghan will never be number one. Not truly. Diana will always come first. But let's not mistake this for rivalry. Meghan doesn't resent Diana herself. What she resents is the weight of Diana's shadow. Because when Harry prepares to return to the UK for something like the Well Child Awards, Meghan sees it not as honoring his mother, but as chaining themselves again to the institution that destroyed her. And isn't there a painful irony there? Meghan fled the UK to avoid Diana's fate, and yet Harry keeps running back to it in Diana's name. This contradiction came to a head in their Montecito fight. Witnesses described Harry's voice cracking as he invoked his mother. "She'd want me there," he allegedly said. For him, it wasn't negotiable. But for Meghan, the invocation of Diana wasn't moving. It was infuriating. Because in her eyes, Diana's legacy has been weaponized. Every time Harry leans on it, Meghan feels sidelined. Every time the world compares her to Diana, she feels she can't measure up. And in that moment, under the California sky, what might have been grief for Harry turned into gasoline on the flames. And let's not forget the deeper psychology. Harry never got to protect Diana. He was a boy, powerless, watching his mother chased to her death by photographers. His whole adult life has been about rewriting that story, protecting Meghan, protecting his children, proving he can save the family he couldn't save as a child. But when Meghan resists, when she pushes back against his Diana-driven decisions, he feels history repeating itself. In his mind, Meghan isn't just disagreeing with him. She's stepping into the role of the world that failed Diana. And that's unbearable for him. Here's another contradiction. Meghan once used Diana's story as a shield. She told Oprah that she felt hounded, suicidal, unsupported, the same way Diana had. Harry embraced that because it fit his narrative. But now, years later, Meghan doesn't want to be cast as Diana anymore. She doesn't want pity, she wants power. Yet Harry is stuck. For him, the only way forward is to keep Diana at the center. Do you see the trap? Meghan wants to escape Diana's ghost, but Harry can't live without it. Now picture that Montecito scene again. Harry's voice rising, his words trembling as he tells Meghan he has to honor his mother. Meghan, shaking her head, her voice sharp, saying the UK will eat him alive, that he's making the same mistakes Diana made by trusting the public's love. For neighbors, it may have looked like just another marital spat. But for those who understand, it was something far deeper. a collision between a man clinging to a ghost and a woman trying to outrun it. And this leads to the question that no one dares ask aloud. Is Diana the invisible wedge in their marriage? Because while the world focuses on money, titles, and fame, the deeper truth might be simpler. Harry can't let Diana go. Meghan can't carry Diana's shadow anymore. And the result is an unspoken rivalry neither of them will admit. Now for the cliffhanger. Because the fight about Diana didn't end in Montecito. It followed Harry onto the plane. It followed him to London. And whispers suggest Meghan's final words before he left cut him to the core. Words that didn't just question his trip, but questioned whether he could ever truly be free from his mother's ghost. And that question, whether Harry is living for his mother or for himself, would haunt him every step of the way to the Wellchild Awards. What if the very fortune Harry and Meghan thought would buy them freedom has now become the chains that bind them? What if the glittering promises of Netflix contracts, Spotify deals, and Hollywood power dinners turned out to be little more than fragile lifelines, leaving them not liberated but trapped in a cycle of constant reinvention? That's the truth we explore in Chapter 6. Because behind the Montecito mansion, the expensive wardrobe, and the perfectly manicured image lies a couple under relentless financial and reputational pressure. And money, or the lack of it, can poison even the strongest relationships. Let's begin with the promise. When Harry and Meghan walked away from the royal family, they walked away from guaranteed wealth, security, and status. In return, they told the world they wanted financial independence. The deals came quickly. Netflix signed them for a reported $100 million. Spotify offered them a $20 million podcast deal. It looked like a jackpot, the kind of contracts that not only secured their lifestyle, but validated their decision to leave the monarchy. The narrative was perfect. Harry and Meghan weren't dependents. They were creators, entrepreneurs, forces of their own destiny. But here's the shocking twist. Most of that money wasn't guaranteed. These weren't blank checks. They were performance-based contracts, tied to the delivery of content. And content is fickle. A Netflix documentary might make headlines for a week, but then what? Spotify expected more than one podcast series. Hollywood executives wanted consistency, not just scandal-driven bursts. And soon, Meghan and Harry faced the harsh reality of the entertainment industry. If you don't deliver, you don't get paid. Now picture Meghan. Hollywood was supposed to be her comeback stage. She imagined herself producing groundbreaking series, becoming a media mogul in her own right. Instead, archetypes collapsed after one season. Spotify executives publicly ridiculed her, calling her a grifter who didn't put in the work. Can you imagine the humiliation? For a woman who left the UK to control her narrative, being labeled lazy and opportunistic by the very industry she wanted to dominate must have felt like betrayal on an epic scale. And then there's Harry. He was never built for Hollywood. Contracts, boardrooms, strategy meetings, this isn't his world. He signed the deals, yes, but his heart is in causes, not content. Meghan's frustration at the unraveling deals likely landed squarely on him. She may have blamed him for not doing enough, for not networking harder, for not playing the Hollywood game the way she wanted. And Harry, who sacrificed his military career and royal privileges to support Meghan's dream, must have felt cornered. Imagine the resentment building on both sides. Meghan furious at the missed opportunities, Harry exhausted by the pressure to keep up with a world he doesn't understand. And here's the irony. The Montecito lifestyle they flaunt, private security, staff, travel, image consultants, isn't sustainable without massive income. Estimates suggest they spend millions annually just to maintain their California empire. Without consistent deals, the money drains fast. Isn't it strange how they left the UK to escape financial dependence on the crown, only to find themselves desperately dependent on Hollywood executives, paparazzi attention, and public interest? Now, let's ask the audience directly. Have you ever thought financial independence would bring peace, only to realize it brought even more stress? That's the trap Harry and Meghan are caught in. Every dollar they earn is tied to performance. Every appearance, every interview, every leaked story becomes a commodity. And when your marriage becomes part of the business model, where does love end and strategy begin? This brings us back to Montecito. Witnesses describe their argument as fiery, with Meghan gesturing forcefully, Harry looking overwhelmed. Insiders whisper that money was a key trigger. Meghan, frustrated by the collapse of deals and the pressure to land new ones, allegedly blamed Harry for being too distracted by the UK, too nostalgic about Diana, too focused on causes instead of cash. Harry, in turn, may have fired back that he never wanted this Hollywood life to begin with. Can you see the clash? Meghan sees opportunity slipping through her fingers. Harry sees himself losing his soul. And then comes Netflix. The golden goose turned albatross. Their documentary series made waves, yes, but critics shredded it as self-indulgent. The follow-up projects struggled to gain traction. Netflix executives, according to industry chatter, began to lose patience. And Meghan knows, if Netflix walks away, their empire collapses. No Netflix, no Hollywood credibility. No credibility, no future deals. It's that fragile. And fragility breeds fear. Fear breeds anger. Anger breeds fights. The contradiction is deliciously tragic. Harry and Meghan once painted themselves as escaping the monarchy's golden cage. Yet now, they're trapped in a new cage, one made of contracts, expectations, and the insatiable hunger of Hollywood. And unlike the monarchy, which provides protection and stability, Hollywood discards you the second you stop being useful. Meghan knows this. That's why her desperation is palpable. And Harry, caught in the middle, becomes both her partner and her punching bag. And what about power? Meghan expected Hollywood to hand her influence. Instead, she finds herself powerless in rooms dominated by studio heads and streaming executives who don't bow to titles. Harry, too, is learning a hard truth. In California, being a prince means nothing if you can't deliver ratings. Isn't that the cruelest irony? They gave up royal power for independence, but independence turned out to mean dependence on people they can't control. Here's where the argument cuts deepest. Reports suggest Meghan accused Harry of being too soft, too unwilling to play hardball with Hollywood. Harry allegedly countered that Meghan was sacrificing their peace for fame. Two worldviews, two visions of freedom, colliding with no middle ground. For neighbors, it may have looked like a fight about schedules. But for Harry and Meghan, it was about survival, financial, emotional, and reputational. And here's the cliffhanger. Money doesn't just fuel fights. It reveals truths. And the truth their Montecito neighbors overheard that day is that the couple who once claimed to have escaped the monarchy's grip are now chained to something far harsher. The cold, unforgiving judgment of Hollywood. And the cracks money exposes are always deeper than they first appear. Because soon, Meghan's dwindling social circle would add another layer of pressure and betrayal. What if Meghan Markle's strongest weapon, her carefully cultivated network of allies, influencers, and power brokers, was now quietly slipping through her fingers? What if the very people she once leaned on for support and credibility were beginning to distance themselves, leaving her isolated in the very world she thought she would conquer? That's the painful reality at the heart of Chapter 7. Because Meghan's Hollywood dream wasn't built alone. It was propped up by a circle of loyal friends, connections, and allies. And now, that circle is cracking. Let's start with a powerful truth. Meghan has always understood the importance of relationships. From her early Hollywood days, she knew success wasn't just about talent. It was about who you knew, who you impressed, and who you kept in your corner. Jessica Mulroney, for example, wasn't just a stylist. She was a close confidant, a gatekeeper to Canada's elite, and someone who helped Meghan project the polished image that caught the world's attention. Serena Williams wasn't just a tennis legend. She was proof that Meghan could rub shoulders with global icons. Oprah wasn't just an interviewer. She was Meghan's shield, the one who gave her the platform to tell her story on her terms. For a while, this circle was impenetrable, powerful, glamorous. But time has a way of testing alliances. Jessica Mulroney? Their once inseparable bond crumbled amid public controversy and whispers of betrayal. Serena Williams? Still friendly, yes, but noticeably more distant, as Meghan's name grew more polarizing. Oprah? While she may never openly disavow Meghan, even her influence has limits, and her silence since the bombshell interview speaks volumes. Do you see the pattern? One by one, the pillars of Meghan's social network have begun to wobble, leaving her more exposed than ever. Now imagine what that means behind closed doors. Meghan built much of her identity on the idea that she wasn't just accepted in elite circles, she belonged. She could walk into a room with Hollywood's brightest and command attention. She could host parties, secure invites, and maintain a public image that screamed power and relevance. But when invitations stop coming, when texts go unanswered, when whispers replace applause, the facade begins to collapse. And Meghan, who thrives on control, must feel that loss like a dagger to the chest. Here's where the Montecito fight comes back into focus. Insiders suggest part of Meghan's fury that day wasn't just about Harry's trip to the UK. It was about the humiliation of realizing her once loyal circle was drifting. Meghan, reportedly, had been frustrated by the lack of A-list support for her projects. Netflix meetings without star backing. Events where her absence wasn't noted as much as she thought it would be. Hollywood is brutal, and when it senses weakness, it pulls back fast. And Meghan, who once expected the phone to never stop ringing, was beginning to hear silence. And here's the contradiction that makes this so powerful. Meghan has always branded herself as independent, self-made, unstoppable. But independence in Hollywood doesn't exist. It's all about alliances. Without them, you're vulnerable. And in Meghan's case, her enemies, both in the UK and in the US, capitalize on that vulnerability. Isn't it ironic that the woman who once seemed surrounded by powerful allies is now finding herself increasingly alone? Let's bring Harry into this. For him, Meghan's fading social circle isn't just her problem, it becomes his too. Every lost friend, every soured connection, every door closed in Hollywood reflects badly on both of them. Meghan, frustrated, likely turned to Harry for solutions. But Harry, who has never been part of that world, doesn't know how to fix it. He doesn't have Oprah on speed dial. He doesn't understand Hollywood networking dinners. He's a soldier, a prince, a man used to different rules of loyalty. And so, once again, Meghan feels unsupported. And Harry feels blamed. Can you see how this spiral feeds itself? And let's not forget the optics. The Sussexes need allies not just for friendships, but for survival. Every documentary, podcast, or project requires backers, collaborators, and celebrity cameos. If Meghan's circle is shrinking, the projects shrink too. No A-listers, no buzz. No buzz, no deals. No deals, no money. And once again, the financial and emotional pressure comes crashing back into their marriage. Now let's ask the audience directly. Have you ever noticed how silence from a friend can feel louder than words? How distance can sting more than outright betrayal? That's Meghan's reality now. And the sting of that silence is what neighbors likely heard in her voice that day in Montecito. Anger, desperation, fear. Because without her circle, Meghan isn't just losing friends. She's losing power. Think of the irony here. Meghan once accused the royal family of leaving her isolated, unsupported, abandoned. Now, in Hollywood, she faces the same problem. Different country, different industry, same outcome. Is it possible that Meghan isn't just unlucky, but that her approach to relationships makes them unsustainable? Too transactional, too intense, too centered on control? That's the question her dwindling circle raises. And then there's the ultimate betrayal. Whispers that some former allies are now talking to the press. Small leaks, tiny insights, little betrayals that fuel the tabloids. For Meghan, that must feel like déjà vu. The same thing she hated about palace staff is happening in Hollywood. Friends turn informants. Allies turn liabilities. And every whisper makes her more paranoid, more controlling, more likely to lash out. And who bears the brunt of that? Harry. Always Harry. So when the fight erupted outside the Montecito mansion, it wasn't just about Harry's trip, or money, or Diana. It was about Meghan's world shrinking, her circle breaking, her control slipping. And in that moment, she turned her frustration not on the absent friends, but on the husband standing in front of her. And here's the cliffhanger. Social circles don't collapse overnight. They crumble slowly, piece by piece, until one day you look around and realize you're standing alone. For Meghan, that day may already be here. And if the cracks in her friendships mirror the cracks in her marriage, then the story only gets darker from here. Because what happens when Harry himself becomes just another person Meghan can't rely on? What if the most dangerous words in a marriage are the ones never spoken aloud? What if Harry's silence, the long pauses, the unspoken resentments, the bottled-up doubts, was more destructive than any argument he and Meghan could ever have in public? That's the heart of Chapter 8. Because while Meghan may shout, gesture, and demand, Harry's power lies in what he doesn't say. And sometimes, silence can roar louder than any voice. Let's start with a brutal truth. Harry has always been a man caught between worlds. He is both a royal and an outcast, both a soldier and a civilian, both a husband and a son haunted by his mother's shadow. For years, he has played the role of protector, first for Meghan, then for Archie and Lilibet. But who protects Harry? Who listens when his pain surfaces? Meghan fills the silence with words, plans, and strategies. Harry fills it with quiet, and that quiet is starting to crack. Picture Harry in Montecito. From the outside, he has everything: a mansion, wealth, freedom, a family of his own. But what if that mansion feels less like home and more like exile? What if California, with its palm trees and paparazzi drones, is not liberation but loneliness dressed in sunshine? Insiders whisper that Harry has moments where he confides in old friends, lamenting that he misses the familiarity of the UK. Even if he doesn't miss the institution itself, he misses the land, the history, the family ties, strained though they may be. And here's the contradiction. He left to escape the monarchy's cage, yet sometimes he feels caged in California. Now imagine what he doesn't tell Meghan. How could he? If he admits he feels unmoored, that he sometimes longs for the UK, Meghan would see it as betrayal. So he keeps it in. He swallows the words. And each unspoken thought becomes a stone in his chest, weighing him down. Silence becomes survival. But silence also becomes poison. Let's ask the audience directly. Have you ever stayed quiet in a relationship because speaking your truth would start a fight you weren't ready to have? That's Harry's daily reality. His silence isn't peace. It's fear. Fear of triggering Meghan's fury. Fear of reopening wounds. Fear of being accused of weakness. And the longer he stays silent, the louder his resentment grows. And then there's the matter of identity. Harry was once a soldier. He thrived on camaraderie, structure, discipline. He had purpose. But in California, what is he? A podcaster? A Netflix producer? A man photographed running errands in Santa Barbara? For Meghan, reinvention is opportunity. For Harry, reinvention feels like erasure. He has lost the role that defined him. And though he rarely admits it, he resents it. He resents trading a military uniform for Hollywood meetings. He resents leaving behind friends who once understood him. And deep down, he resents that Meghan pushed for a life he sometimes struggles to recognize as his own. But Harry doesn't say this. Instead, he grows quieter, more withdrawn. He broods. He drinks, perhaps more than he should, as some whispers claim. He disappears into himself. Meghan, used to controlling the narrative, interprets his silence as indifference. But it isn't indifference, it's pain. Pain he doesn't know how to articulate without blowing up the fragile peace of their marriage. Now, let's explore the symbolism of that Montecito fight. Witnesses saw Meghan shouting, gesturing, demanding answers. Harry, in contrast, was described as pacing, red-faced, his body language screaming frustration but his words barely audible. Isn't that telling? He doesn't explode with words. He implodes with silence. And silence in a marriage can be deafening. And here's the deeper irony. Harry wrote a memoir called Spare, pouring out his deepest secrets to the world. He told the public what he may never have told Meghan in private. He exposed family betrayals, personal wounds, military trauma, all on the page. But what about the truths he couldn't write? The doubts about California. The second thoughts about their Hollywood experiment. The longing for a life he can never return to. Those truths remain locked inside him, festering. And when silence festers, it transforms into resentment. Now ask yourself, how long can someone live in silence before it erupts? Because Harry's silence isn't permanent. It's building pressure, like a volcano waiting to blow. And Meghan, for all her fire, may not see it coming. She's used to controlling the narrative, steering the story, dominating the conversation. But when Harry finally speaks, not to neighbors, not to paparazzi, but to Meghan herself, what will he say? The unspoken resentments are endless. He resents that his children barely know their cousins, their grandparents, their royal heritage. He resents that every UK trip feels like sneaking back into enemy territory. He resents that Meghan's Hollywood vision demands so much of him, when all he ever wanted was a simpler life of service and family. And most of all, He resents that his voice, his true voice, is always drowned out by hers. And yet, here's the paradox. Harry still loves Meghan. He still sees her as the woman he left everything behind for. That love is real. But love doesn't erase resentment. Love doesn't silence the questions he's too afraid to ask. Did I make the right choice? Did I give up too much? Will I ever feel at home again? Those questions swirl inside him, unanswered, unspoken. And one day, they will demand to be heard. Here's the cliffhanger. Because the Montecito fight wasn't just about raised voices. It was also about deadly silences. Meghan's anger was loud, but Harry's silence was louder. And silence, when it finally breaks, can shatter everything. And soon, that silence would crack. Not over money, not over Hollywood, not even over the UK, but over something even more personal, their children.